You're listening to Ecosysteming, the podcast redefining economic development through the lens of equitable entrepreneurship, 2 decades in the making. Join NC Idea's Tom Rue as he engages with entrepreneurs and experts who are challenging the status quo and driving lasting change.
Hello, listeners of NC Idea's Ecosysteming podcast. Boy, do I feel like I'm about to get a brain upgrade with today's guest. He is the Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer at the University of Texas in Arlington. He also happens to be an old and dear friend. Not that he's old, I'm older than him, but we've known each other. Paul, I was looking at this, I think it's been 18 years now. And of course, the person I'm introducing is none other than Paul Corson. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tom. It is. I'd say this genuinely. It is really an honor to be on the show today. I listen to you regularly. I may be your biggest out of state fan, and I am thrilled to be here.
Oh, you're being too kind, and if that's true, you need to broaden your horizons, man. Get out more, because there's got to be a bigger highlight in your career. So, as is kind of inferred in your title, you are Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer at UT Arlington. It's a pretty literal title, but there's a lot, especially in the academic world, right? I mean, a lot of the people so far we have been, interviewing on the podcast, they come from the quote ecosystem space, because that's, it's a big thing, and it's obviously the water we swim in. But I think ecosystem in the higher ed context is almost like an entire industry in and of itself. And that's, frankly, it's one of the reasons I was so excited to get you on board. We are involved in the state of North Carolina supporting a big effort, the NC Innovation effort that people may be familiar with, because, we see a need to really curate that economic potential coming from tech transfer and commercialization. You've done it on a national scale. You've, built world-renowned programs doing this. So I thought if you wouldn't mind, maybe, start with the beginning, like where you're at now, and then we'll go from there.
As you said, I'm at the University of Texas in Arlington. Arlington is a city of about 400,000 people, equidistant between Dallas and Fort Worth in North Texas. The city of Arlington would be the largest city in 22 states. And in North Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, often called, I say all the time, there's no A in DFW or Metroplex, so I only refer to North Texas because at least there's an A in North Texas. We are getting close to being the third largest metropolitan area in the country. We are closing in on Chicago, and based on census data and growth statistics, we should pass Chicago to become the third largest metropolitan region in the country in the next couple of years. So it is an incredibly vibrant, dynamic, fun place to be. The University of Texas at Arlington, UTA, is an R1 research university, which means a very high level of research in the Carnegie classification. And we are a Texas Tier 1 university. We have about 40,000 plus students, 42, 44, something like that. I believe we have the largest nursing program for any public university in the country. Also have great engineering school, business school, an architecture school, which plays in a lot of ways I know we'll get to. So just an incredibly, as I said, fun, dynamic place. All things sort of pointing in the right direction to build, to your point, ecosystems, to focus on entrepreneurship at all levels, high tech, deep tech, high growth, family, Main Street, hobby. It's just a really fun place to be.
Cool. We're gonna dive down into some of those categories, but before we do, and just for the benefit, of listeners who this isn't their domain, you mentioned you're an R1. That's a research institution designation. Just give the very, very short, like how many R1 universities are there in the country, and that R1 means like you're the top, right? Like you have certain things you have to demonstrate to get that designation. And I mean, are there even 100 R1 schools in the country?
I believe there are over 100, but I believe in terms of all of the universities in the country, I think it's less than 15% or less than 10% are classified as R1 universities.
And why is that important? Like, why would the layperson need to understand the value of a research institution, an R1 school? Like, what do they do for humanity and society?
It's the cradle of so much of what we think about today as our world. I remember in a previous place when I was at the University of Utah, I was looking at disclosed technologies. So disclosed technologies means something that a faculty member has been researching and puts forth as a possible new invention. And in the late 60s, early 70s, there we had disclosures for steerable headlights. Think about when, for any of us, I have two cars in my family. Only one of them has steerable headlights, and it's considered, more of a luxury type car. For someone to think they invented that over 50 years ago in a university setting, and it never made it to the market for how long? I remember there were nuclear power sources for satellites. Think about all the satellites that are in space now, right? So this is just going back 50 years. Research university been around a lot longer than that. And think about the amount of change, the exponential nature of change in the world today. So much of that comes out of universities. I just read about the child who had, I'll butcher it. I will butcher details, as you know, but the child who had the gene editing cure very recently. Right? That's out of university research.
What I was teeing you up for, a phrase I want to give you credit for. I thought you were the one that put this in my brain, so maybe I'm misattributing it. But I thought you were the one that told me that like these research institutions, like collectively, we are the creators of new knowledge.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
This is where humanity is served because there's this, to overuse a phrase, an engine, if you will, like there's this, function that is in pursuit, of the next frontier. Like what else is out there? How do we expand our knowledge in these fields? And the R1s in particular, you know, are the ones that are mostly focused on that, or more focused, I should say, on that. And then I think your function, and I'm putting words in your mouth now, which I try to avoid in these podcasts. I think it's bad form, but the function, for people like you is to really serve humanity, right? It's got to make it off the bench and into the market.
I won't take credit for saying we're the cradle of new knowledge. Hopefully somebody far smarter than I said that long time ago. But to your point, I start to think about what's the purpose of a research university? And the research university has to create that new knowledge. But then we've taken the research university in the United States, at least, to be training a workforce to take that created knowledge and apply it in companies in the world. And then research universities have taken on the responsibility for transferring that technology into the marketplace or into the real world. So knowledge for knowledge's sake used to be innovative and revolutionary. And now we've gotten to where knowledge for knowledge's sake is foundational and wonderful, but where do we go beyond that? Right? How do we create technology? And then how do we take that technology and apply it and use it? And so it just came back. So the CRISPR therapy, the first personalized CRISPR therapy, was recently given to a baby with a genetic disease. So CRISPR research done forever, gene editing research not done forever, but long history. Then to your point about the iceberg, right? What we see in research is the part of the iceberg above the ocean. And then what happens to get it to the market is below, maybe. That CRISPR gets disclosed, research done at a university gets disclosed, then applied, and finally 10, 12 years later, right now we're putting it into babies with genetic diseases. That's where the US Research University has come so far in terms of creating the knowledge, applying the knowledge, using the knowledge.
So then what's in it for the university, to use a crude expression, right? I mean, not that it has to have any, traditional ROI, return on investment, but like, and lest the listener think I don't understand, I'm just trying to be a good host here and give Paul the floor to explain, why it's in the interest of the universities to see these, great invention and these disclosures go off and have a bigger life, serving humanity, being in the marketplace. So what's in it for the universities to do this?
There's so much nuance to everything. And I often say I live in this world of gray and nuance. Stop me if I go too far, but there's fulfilling our purpose. Our purpose is to create and apply this knowledge. There's a reputational benefit. We want to be known because there is people have choice. Students have choice. Why should they come to UTA? Why should they go to Harvard? Why should they go to Duke or you name it, UNC Chapel Hill, right? So we have to attract professors. We have to attract students. We have to, attract funding. And so why do we exist? We have to provide value. It gets into customers and stakeholders and all that kind of stuff. And, one of the things that so many people focus on is, can we generate revenue on behalf of the university by getting all this research, all this technology into the marketplace? The short answer is yes, we can. The more complex answer is that of all those R1s, all those universities doing research, less than a dozen of them probably break even on that exercise on a regular basis. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but we do this, yes, to create value. One of our friends, Gary Schoeniger, often talks about the definition of an entrepreneur is someone who maximizes their human potential by creating value for others. I have shamelessly stolen that and said that the mission of my Center for Entrepreneurship and Tech Development, our mission is to maximize societal value or benefit through getting the entrepreneurship, research, and technology done, conducted, developed at UTA into the marketplace. Sometimes there's going to be a financial value to that, but sometimes we just want to give it away. We just want to say, this needs to go into a nonprofit. This needs to go into a community-based organization. This needs to go into a company. This needs to go into a service or product. Figuring out the value and then figuring out the monetary quantification of that value becomes a tricky and, in a lot of ways, fun exercise.
Let me, you've got a very accomplished CV, and I would recommend anybody listening that wants to know more about you just hit you up on LinkedIn. But, if I were to abbreviate across your last several positions, including where you're at now and then where you were at the U, Deputy Director of Pivot and Director of Entrepreneurship, more broadly. And then, where we met way back in the day, at the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the Department of Commerce, right? there's this word that keeps popping up across your titles. It's that E word that's like impossible to spell and it has too many syllables. It's almost as if it was French in its origin, LOL, because it is. That's entrepreneurship. So why isn't just the research for the sake of research good enough?
It gets back to that iceberg analogy. If we don't get the research that went into gene editing, into CRISPR, into a product, then it never gets into a baby. And I often like to talk about, the advances we've made in the last 100 years in medicine. Maybe it's 150 years. I think about bloodletting and leeches to cure illness, or, taking, some traditional medicine that has value and has benefit. But if we never developed antibiotics, if we never developed, topical creams, if we never got to the place where we could suture more effectively, what happens to our lifespan? What happens to our quality of life? What happens to all those folks who, heaven forbid, have to go off and fight a war? I think about how many people's lives are made better, are extended, more full. They can see their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, because of the benefits that we've had by applying the work. That never happens without the entrepreneurial nature of it.
The mindset, right? Yeah, no, I get it. As a matter of fact, a mutual acquaintance of ours just recently went through some fairly significant surgery. And when he was explaining to me the process of what he just underwent, right? Before I could just deal with like, wow, this is life altering for him. This science of it, right? The plumbing of it, like, and I thought to myself, and we talked about it, and he actually was laughing after when I brought it to his attention. It's like, you imagine the trial and error that happened over years, the advances in research, like before you got this, state of the art surgery that is allowing him to kind of proceed with a semi-normal life, right? There was a lot of iteration along the way and a lot of dedicated doctors and researchers, right?
Well, just think about how we sterilize things. One of the technologies I've looked at in the past is sterilizing catheters with visible light. How many people die from sepsis? How many people have said you go into the hospital and you take your chances because you're going to get some antibiotic resistant microbe or this or that or whatever, right? But just those little tiny things become so important. And to your point, that mindset of, I always talk about the mindset of entrepreneurs. They have to believe they can do something that no one else has ever done, or that no one can do as well as they can do. That's a crazy mindset. And it applies itself sometimes, to higher education. The faculty member who's trying to figure out the research is often figuring out something no one's ever done or doing it better. Similar mindset to an entrepreneur. It's just a different application.
That's what drives them, right? I mean, I got to see that on display last year. You were kind enough to invite me to a big summit that you were holding, and I think it was I think the crowning jewel or the graduating function of the summit was you were recognizing all the faculty that had patents issued, and just watching them go up there. And then I got to meet them all in the nice little happy hour we had afterwards. And to your point, I think without exception, you talk to these people, what they might lack in other interests. Like I wouldn't have asked them what the latest reality television program is. Frankly, I couldn't answer that either. So I'm just similarly focused. But boy, when they start talking about their research, right, and why, like, so what's compelling you, right? It's always something that's in the improvement category. It's in the pushing the envelope. It's we thought there was more impact to have, right? And that's I'll tell you that those are the kind of chance experiences that you get, and it kind of recharges the batteries. It's chicken soup for the soul, right? Because I'm thankful that there are people that are driven that way, right? That want to discover those things.
It's the first thing I do when I talk to faculty members. My background, a little bit wonky. I'm a Russian studies guy, 2 degrees in that. I don't have a scientific degree. I don't have a business degree. Don't have a law degree. I don't practice anything I went to school for, really. But when I talk to these people, the one thing that I always think about is mindset, to your point. What motivates? What drives? Why do they do their research? And that's what I really want when I think about then the role of the university and trying to get it in the marketplace. Their motivation often is not just, I like to be in a lab and play with things. They're often motivated by whether it's personal, societal, something else. To your point, how do I do something new, novel, that's going to have that societal benefit? My job is to bring that aspiration to reality. I want to take their genius and turn it into somebody else's, product, somebody else's passion. And so, the touchscreen on an iPhone, miniaturization, we're talking today, somebody is trying to get communication systems to smaller than your fingernail. Think about all the things that can happen when the GPS tracker becomes an absolute throwaway item. Not an Apple iTag that you don't want to lose. You don't want to throw it away. Think about when you can just print at your house like you print a stamp. You can just print a geo tracker and you can put it on anything you want. Your pet, your kid. But can I put it on individual piece of fruit? I think bananas. Bananas, once they're picked, it's like 4 weeks before they're ready to go to market. What happens to that banana in 4 weeks?
A lot. Yeah. So here's a question for you, because you live at this nexus of the university and industry, right? Let me think how I'm going to ask this question. Do you think kind of like so there was it sounds quaint, sounds like almost a bygone era of Bell Labs, right? Where big companies, think GE, and Xerox and, Innovation Park, like they invested a lot of money in doing a lot of research, and they're still for sure doing that. Is there kind of a dividing line between industry, formal or otherwise, that we just say like, well, if it's of this potential and requires this much capitalization, we leave it to industry, and if it's over here, we leave it or we hope that it comes out of university? I'm not articulating this well, but we've known each other long enough. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to divine an answer from my gibberish here. But how does that dynamic work?
It's one of the biggest problems that we face trying to think about how to commercialize technology. I talk about it not as tech transfer. There's certain concepts, words I try not to use. Tech transfer is one that I try not to use. I try to think of it instead as innovation management. And that in itself is an oxymoron. Innovation should be this free-flowing, crazy, chaotic thing. And then I'm trying to harness it and manage it. Really what I'm trying to do is direct that energy. I'm just trying to channel things. A lot of times I think of myself, I'm sort of water looking for a crack. And I just want to make that crack bigger. So when I think about innovation management, there's a market, there's an opportunity. We talk about faculty who do research and often being a problem in search of a solution. I'm trying to turn that on its head. And I'm trying to bring a mindset to faculty of, if you are driven, if you are interested in the commercial impact, the societal benefit, then we have to go beyond just creating the knowledge. We have to get the knowledge out. We do that by first identifying an opportunity in the marketplace. That's the first piece of innovation management. Now, to your question, the second piece of it is, when is it ready to leave the university environment? Usually industry, and often big industry, publicly traded, quarterly earnings cycles, investor pressures, they can't just take flyers on unproven research concepts. And they don't have unlimited budgets to invest in R&D that is highly speculative and likely to fail. Startups can do that. That's venture 1 in 10, or universities 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. And so we look at, what is that commercialization pathway? How far do we have to advance something? We talk a lot in technology readiness levels, or TRLs. They typically go from TRL 0 or 1 to TRL 9. TRL 9 being it's fully functional, developed product in the marketplace, very mature. TRL 0 or 1 being like, an idea on the back of a napkin. And so I talk about industry preferring to have stuff that's more TRL 6, 7, 8 before they can take the risk of investing in it, trying to finalize it, get it to market. Startups can take something that's TRL 3, 4, 5. And so when we're looking internally, I'm looking at what motivates the faculty member. How do I identify opportunities? And then how far do I have to advance the work until either a startup can license it or industry can license it? And that's one of the biggest challenges. Universities don't have unlimited funds. We don't have, massive patenting budgets. And so how do I apply some of those same concepts that an entrepreneur or an investor would apply to figuring out which research projects have the highest degree of likelihood to be licensed to try and generate revenue? And where do I invest my patent budget to advance those projects?
Hasn't AI solved all that for you yet?
We do. I am a little bit of a tech phobe in many ways. You might know that. Though I joke, I don't know the URL for ChatGPT. But we actually do take this 2-stage process where we talk to the faculty member, we get a sense, and then we try and use AI tools to get a sense of market opportunity. And if we can do that, then we'll actually, have a human do a deep dive market research report. But we are trying to use them. We can also, I know other schools are using them to understand patent positions or things like that. The challenge that really has to be worked out with AI is if AI is using all publicly available resources and AI is training on all publicly available resources, is putting confidential information into an AI engine a public disclosure?
That is a challenge. We've been doing some skunk work projects around AI ourselves, right? Because we do these grant cycles and we get hundreds of applications, and it's a very labor intensive, human capital intensive process, right? We have core reviewers that we're blessed to have that volunteer their time. We have our own fellows and interns, and then staff do it. And so it's like, okay, we brute force this, and then we're like, well, wait a minute, the whole application process is proprietary, right? We say that it's confidential, so we stopped short of actually going full scale AI to augment our process because I can't quite afford yet the sandbox. So what our analysis said was like we might be able to consider using AI as a tool for what it's good at, the brute force type stuff, but we have to sequester our instance, right? And we may pull from the public data source, but we cannot contribute, 1 megabyte of data. And so many of these models are just huge hoovering vacuums, right? And it's weird. I think it was I want to say it was Salesforce with Matthew McConaughey from your neck of the woods down there doing these ads about like, data is going to be like the next frontier in AI. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, including, as it was inferred in one of his commercials, like, the white hats and the black hats. And so there's people that like don't understand, what's all encompassing around AI. That's like one of those nuanced parts that once you start thinking about it, you're like, oh, right. What's it, just to say nothing of the ethics behind it. Right. So if I say create original artistic images in the style of this famous artist, this famous artist, this famous artist, well, then I'm doing something that's derivative and probably infringing, right, on the works of somebody else.
It's one of the reasons, like, I don't call myself an entrepreneur. I've worked in startups. I have what I believe to be an entrepreneurial mindset. I have too much respect for those people who have taken that second mortgage on their house. The mayor of Durham who cashed out his pension right? I have too much respect for those people who have put it all on the line in pursuit of maximizing their human potential, in pursuit of some social benefit, or an exchange of money. I've never taken that amount of risk. And so I won't call myself an entrepreneur. And in the same way, I don't want to use someone else's intellectual product or capacity and then pass it off as my own. And that's largely why I refuse to use AI.
Yeah, I get it. I'll say you're probably a little too hard on yourself about not using the entrepreneurship moniker. And I say that as somebody that has put their signature on a $2.5 million line of credit, thinking like, man, if this doesn't go through, what little nest egg I had at that point, what little equity I might have had in my house, all of it is on the line. And for the uninitiated, there were 6 of us in the company that all signed that. By the way, when you do something like that, you're not signing up for like 1/6 of the exposure. The fine print of the documents you sign say that the bank can subrogate to the maximum amount of any signature on there. So if like 5 of your co-signers are completely worthless, they'll get as much as they can out of you. And I remember because I didn't tell Jackie that, I had signed that. And by 2 days had gone by, it was already like ancient history to me because I was putting out fires in front of me. And I get a very angry phone call from my wife and like, did you forget to tell me something? And I was like, what? She said, there's a courier standing in our kitchen from the bank who needs a signature on one form that you forgot to sign earlier in the week. That's how my wife found out that I had just personally guaranteed a $2.5 million line of credit.
I'm really curious your thought about this. It's something that I was thinking about in prep for today, actually. When you and I were young, TV shows, culture, society, we grew up kids of the 80s and we glorified the Miami Vice lifestyle. We saw movies like Scarface. It was live hard, play hard, a little reckless with, substances.
Hey, now.
A lot of violence. Um, Society was preaching that. One of the questions I asked somebody recently, I said, do you think as a child growing up in the, let's say 2010s, do you think entrepreneurship was glamorized to an extent you didn't understand the risk you were taking signing those documents? Did you not understand what you were getting yourself into, maybe?
Here's what I'll say on that, right? As a proud Gen Xer raised on hose water and neglect, we were a little more rugged, right? And like you just did what you had to do and you dealt with the consequences as they came, for better or worse. I will say in today and from starting in 2010 and certainly to the present, it's never been easier to start something. It's never been easier to test something before you commit to a production line and manufacturing, right? Pre-internet, the way you could try A/B testing or get your MVP out there, like you had to invest tens of thousands and do limited runs. And if it was like anything that was like required, like, I don't know, injection molding, for example, right? Like you were having to commit to mold heavy, costly machinery to be made just to get to a point where you could test the market. Now you can 3D print, the first 100 prototypes, slap up a site, with a credit card on Square or GoDaddy, right, that can accept payments. You have the tools to go after the longest end of the tail, right? We always had to shoot at what would be the broadest market, which also had most of the focus. Now you can build successful companies going for the nichiest of niche consumers because that tech exists. So whether or not it just made the perception that it's de-risked, I think it's actually made it de-risked. And I'll give you another perfect example. I was at a big event here in the ecosystem. We were meeting with these founders, and because we fund companies, sometimes I I get more interest from people than my personality would otherwise warrant because they see dollar signs. Thanks. But this woman is pitching me on her startup, and oh, I don't know, I don't even need to raise private equity. I just need a bridge around, and we've got 200,000, like, done deal, committed. We got a client ready to sign, and she's telling me, like, right, that it would be the easiest thing to do in the world, and like if we could just lend that her 200 grand, and they'll pay a whopping 3% on that 200 grand. And I looked at her and I said, I restated that, all the selling points, how much she's got in receivables or orders that are just waiting for fulfillment. I said, well, then why don't you just go to a bank? And she looked at me like it was an odd question. And she said, well, they won't fund me yet. I'm still pre-revenue. And I said, but if you got all that, if all that stuff is certain, as you implied that it was, then personally guarantee it. You would have thought I'd spit in her drink by suggesting it. Right. And so, which tells me, and it's a teachable moment and it's a coaching moment. So I let her kind of diffuse a little bit. And I said, listen, would you mind a little coaching? Can I give you some tips here? Because, she's going to set out to try to start raising money. Be careful on how hard you sell the upside, because you were telling me basically it's a slam dunk. So if it's a slam dunk, you should be confident and bet on yourself. So either you have a crisis of confidence, or maybe you embellish just ever so slightly how much of a sure thing those revenue lineups are. So I think in those regards, the world is a little softer, fuzzier, and weird because it has become so much easier that I think a lot of people take all the easy stuff for granted and then expect everything to be that easy.
There was we host 1 million cups. Thank you, Mr. Rue. Cameron Cushman. Shout out to Cameron in North Texas and Kaufman. We were hosting 1 million cups, and somebody was talking about their product. And they had answered a question earlier in relation to their product and why it was good for faculty. And I then asked them, what do you do for people who are just starting out and don't have enough cash to pay you as a consultant? And their answer was, yeah, there are people who don't have enough money to pay us, and there are lots of other resources. They're good too. But if they can't pay us, we're in business for business. They're not our customer. We're not their product. And I thought to myself, they answered the first question about why faculty should use them in a way without thinking about faculty being some of those folks who haven't raised money yet for most of their startups. And it's that things have become easy and soft and fuzzy, and entrepreneurship is still not for the faint of heart.
No, it's a contact sport.
That's one of the things where I ask my question. We sell it. Society, America, often sells entrepreneurship now as like this thing with low barriers to entry, but you still have to take the process seriously. You still have to understand. And that's an area where teachable moment for myself. When I'm talking about it, when I'm thinking about it, and when I'm encouraging people to or not to, I have to check myself that the world has changed so much since I was often their age, a lot of students in particular. I really have to think about the complexity of the world they live in versus the complexity of the world I lived in.
Yeah. And I'll make this point from what other side. If I look at our portfolio, the hundreds of companies we have funded and the standouts, the ones that are really going out and just beating all the expectations and really crushing it, the common element for most of them would be they're kind of in that old school entrepreneurship mold. And I don't mean older, right? I'm talking youngsters that are still channeling that, like, no, we go where the data tells us. We don't take anecdote, the plural of anecdotal is still not data. We don't lie to ourselves, right? We don't just look for a quick win and don't keep asking more questions. It's we grind it out. We work towards. We worry about profitability, for goodness sakes. Oh God, there's an evil answer, right? Like, grow your business without needing to take equity. It's the most expensive way to fund a company, right? That's the common thing that I see.
It's entrepreneurship isn't about risk taking; it's about risk mitigation.
Exactly, and that's one of the biggest misconceptions. I'm ignoring Christian. He's trying to give me the warning here to land the plane, because there's one other topic I want to talk about. I think it'd be remiss of us if we didn't, and that is, we've talked about kind of the business world and academic, and higher ed, and like how you guys are doing the dance to bring things out. Is there a role for the federal government? Let me pull the pin on that grenade and we can start playing catch.
My background is such, I've worked for startups, I've worked for the federal government, I've worked with community colleges, with universities, I've worked, very fortunate to have worked with Kaufman, at least arm's length when you were there, Tom. I do think there is a role for the government. And I will say, I mean, my team, shout out to Antonio. Antonio bought me a shirt and it says, "I hate bureaucracy." And I wear that shirt proudly. I do hate bureaucracy. The team jokes. They're like, "Paul, you're not a rule breaker so much as you just have a different definition for what a rule means." And so there are lots of this idea, even me, you telling me I have that entrepreneurial mindset, right? I'm always pushing to Gary's point. I'm always exploring that boundary. It's good to have guardrails. And in some ways, governments create regulations, they create rules, they create boundaries. And I have a healthy respect for boundaries, because I am someone, if I look over the edge, I might look too hard and then just, gravity pulls me down. So I love those boundaries. That's one. How we define and how we engage with those boundaries is a different thing. But I also think, if economic development was a business, there'd be people doing it as a business. It is a public good in so many ways, and public goods are often government funded. So I think there's a role for government in economic development. There's a role for government in science. If we do want to live in a system where we have our 401ks and we play in the market and we have retirement savings and all of this and we have insurance, right? Somebody needs to make the investments that business won't invest in. Our applied research today is usually somebody else's basic research from a long time ago. We need that basic research. Market inefficiencies exist. If every business could be created by self-financing or through somebody else's investment, we'd have no need for loans. We'd have no need for the SBA. We'd have no need for SBIR programs. Like, there are lots and lots and lots of areas where state, let's say local, regional, state, national government is necessary. So I worry that in some ways, there's a tendency to just say government is bad, markets are good, bureaucracy is bad, entrepreneurship is good, business is the cure to everything. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We didn't get here on business alone.
Yeah, that's very profound. All right, so I'm going to turn to final approach now, and in so doing, I'm going to pay you a compliment again. Hopefully, change your mind. That you eschew the entrepreneurship title. You recently did something very entrepreneurial, and it's something that we preach to everybody we fund here, and that's focusing on customer discovery. You honored me with an appointment to a council that you've impaneled for UTA. I know I brought down the group IQ, but the other people are incredibly impressive. And the fact that you had the presence of mind to say, hey, as we figure out this for UTA, we can't be so much in our own little echo chamber. And let's bring these people with a global perspective and experience base to help inform us, tell us some of the things about ourselves that maybe we don't want to hear, right? That's never easy. And that's what we keep telling our startups here, right? That customer discovery, it recharges the batteries to get the compliments, but it is, chicken soup for the soul. It is nutritional. It is good calories. The the negative feedback, because they are doing you a favor, telling you what you need to hear, even if you don't want to hear it. And then you get through that because that's necessary. And then it's like, okay, then it's the aspirational focus. What can we become? And, having sat through the first council, I got to tell you, I'm already looking forward to our October gathering, because you started a really important thought exercise that candidly, I think will inform R1s around the country. I won't be surprised if people are copying you very soon, as they did during your tenure at the U in Utah. So yeah, don't say in front of me again that you're not an entrepreneur. You demonstrate all of the good traits of that. And I think that's why we have 169 mutual connections on LinkedIn. I was going to preempt you because I knew you did your homework and you were going to preempt me. And so that's why we have that many. I'll be honest with you, I was surprised that number is low compared to some others.
So here are a couple things. So one, a big shout out to everybody, to those who listen, who are part of the group that we convene. We started out looking at the business model of research universities. If student tuition doesn't pay the bills, and if research doesn't pay the bills, and economic development doesn't pay any bills, and they're the three pillars of a modern research university, how do we keep the lights on? Because I genuinely believe, circling all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, without the modern U.S. research university, our world and our ability to enjoy that world looks a lot different. So I want to do everything I can to maintain what I think is a national treasure in our research universities. So shout out to the group for thinking about that. To your point, Tom, we then, like good entrepreneurs, we went where the data and where the market was sort of telling us. And we got to the point that, UTA is a different kind of R1 university. We are minority serving. We are Hispanic serving. We are Asian Pacific Islander serving. We are, I think, in the top 5, if not the number 1 public university for veterans to come. We have first gen, incredibly high rate of first gen. What does all that look like when it gets applied to a research university? There are probably more universities like us than there are universities like a Johns Hopkins or a Harvard or a Stanford. And we're all pursuing R1. We're all pursuing AAU status. What does it mean for us to be in R1 with our clientele, our student base, our community?
It's the future. That's the answer. Well, Paul, I mean, that and many other reasons are why I cherish our friendship as much as we do. And I thank you for what you do for all of us to advance, in the broadest of sense, this thing of ours, because we're all interconnected, as you said, ever so eloquently. So thank you for that. I look forward to every text and missive I get from you. And looking forward to talking to you again real soon.
I can't say how thankful I am to be on the show. And I can't say how thankful and grateful I am. 18 years ago, I couldn't spell entrepreneurship either. And I have learned so much from you personally and the example and what you're doing for the state of North Carolina. I have looked at moving to North Carolina several times. It's never been right, but I have the utmost respect for your state, for the people in it, for the experiments that you are conducting, and for the success that you guys are having. It's really, it is inspirational. And I aspire to do something as great.
Well, I doubt the state of Texas will ever not recognize how important you are to the economy. But if they should ever have a lapse, we'll try to keep a light on for you here in North Carolina, Paul.
Thank you, Tom.
Stay connected with NC Idea on LinkedIn and Facebook, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest as we celebrate our 20th year. Catch new episodes of Ecosysteming every other Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of this thing of ours.